tell me you didn't watch the video without telling me you didn't watch the video. I've gotten some hilarious comments that kind of cracked me up, and I thought I would address just a couple before we dive back into the Daybell trial. And we have so much to talk about. If I am criticizing Mr. Pryor, who is the defense attorney, and saying that he screwed up or something along those lines, I've had many people commenting, it's not the defense's case yet. It's the prosecution's case, and the defense can't bring forth any witnesses and blah, blah. I know. I explained all that even in one of my videos, and I even went so far as to explain, because someone asked why are they not bringing their own expert witnesses yet, and that's the reason, because that's not their case yet. The prosecution puts forth their case in chief. Pryor, as defense counsel, gets to cross-examine, but he does not get to bring his own witnesses yet. Once the prosecution rests, then it's his turn, and then the prosecution will get to do cross-examination. I know this, I've explained it before, but in case you're wondering, and if you leave that comment, I will know you didn't watch even the intro. The other one I'm getting sometimes is, why are you defending Chad and Lori? Why would you defend them with using religion? And I want to say, again, you did not watch the video if that's what you think. I am not defending them. I don't know anyone who is an active member of my faith. I am of the same faith that Chad and Lori purportedly pretended to be. But no, what I'm doing here is explaining context and some of the jargon that's in our church. Just like in any microculture around the world, whether you work at McDonald's, whether you're in the military. I knew someone in the Air Force and they were dropping acronyms left and right. I had no clue what they were saying half the time. That kind of thing. It's, if you're not part of the microculture, there's just stuff you won't know and you might not understand. So I'm giving context and helping, hopefully, to help people understand what they may not know, simply because they're not part of this microculture. That's it. You run into a lot, actually, as a writer, of how do you explain these terms and these elements without being, by the way, reader, here is some information you need to know, even though all my characters know it. So you have to find natural ways to work it in. They aren't doing that in the trial, obviously, so it isn't the point of the trial, but hopefully this is useful to understand more. And then the last thing is a big thank you from a viewer, Katie, who reached out, and she shared with me some of her information that she'd done research-wise with Embracing the Light by Betty Eady and Visions of Glory, which are the two books a lot of near-death experience type people are gravitating towards, especially Visions of Glory. It seems like all of the crazy true crime that we're seeing from Latter-day Saint people all can funnel back, especially to Visions of Glory. So she reached out, she shared some of her information, and I told her I hadn't yet read Visions of Glory. I was hoping to find a used copy somewhere because I cannot bear to give the author royalties. And she sent me a copy. So yay, thank you, Katie. I'm looking forward to reading it, or having read it, to educate myself on that craziness. One bit on that, I also wanted to mention their channel that misspoke, saying, I don't know where they got the information from, but this is incorrect, saying that Visions of Glory was the highest selling book last year in Utah. That is not even close to accurate. In fact, I don't know a single person who's not into true crime who has read it, and I know a lot of readers. I'm in the industry. And I also use some industry calculator kinds of things, using Amazon rankings. No, not even close. Not in paperback, not in ebook. It's not even remotely close to being the highest selling book in Utah now, or probably ever. So I don't know where they got that information from, but that is incorrect. Fortunately, I can say that. So, welcome to True Crime Faith and Shoggoth. I am your host, Annette Lyon, USA Today bestselling author of the suspense novel Just One More and a whole bunch of other stuff. I am also a woman of faith, as I've said, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so a true crime junkie, which is why we're here. All of those things are wrapped up together. We're going to dive in to April 25th and 26th. That's day 11 and 12. So I'm just going to just cram as much as we can in here, add some of my theological insights, my own true crime opinions, laugh a little bit at John Pryor because he finished up the testimony of coroner Brenda Dye. She began her testimony on day 10. In my last video, I talked a lot about her testimony, and I dipped into this day a little bit. I didn't put the, by the way, this was the next day on there. But there wasn't a whole lot more than I've said already about her testimony that I found intriguing or needing to be said, except for one other additional detail. And that is that an undigested meal in Tammy's stomach that they discovered after they had done the autopsy. McDonald's meal in her stomach that their son had brought back from work, or after he'd gotten off of work, which is another interesting thing. Their son, I believe it was Garth at the time, was working at like a haunted mansion, spook alley kind of a place, which strikes me as very odd for a family that believes in light and dark and spirits and influences. And I'm surprised they let him, or that he would even want to work in that kind of place. Just curious. I find that interesting. But also the fact that Tammy had a meal undigested in her stomach at the time of her death, that tells us that Chad was lying when he said she threw up violently many times and that she died from choking on her own vomit. She did not throw up. There's no evidence of vomit anywhere, and she had an undigested meal in her stomach. Had several witnesses in a row, and then one a little bit later in the day. I'm going to put them all together here because the point of them was the same. We have Kelsey Harris. She was a clogging teacher of Tammy's. Shanna Miller and Jennifer Geisler. They were both colleagues of Tammy's at the school that she was librarian at. And then there was Richard Garner, who was the principal of that school. All four of those witnesses testified to Tammy's health and fitness. She had no problem keeping up in her clogging class. Says Kelsey Harris, she was healthy and fine. Shannon Miller attended the high fit classes with Tammy. Says she was healthy, she could keep up with everybody else. And high fit is intense. We're talking, like burpees and jumping around and all these really intense things. I don't think I could handle a high fit class if you paid me to. But she did. She did it just fine. Jennifer Geisler, same thing. She also went to the high fit classes, explained that those are far more intense than Zumba, which is more dance-like. I've done Zumba and I've gotten a pretty good sweat out of it. So she said that Tammy was fine in all those classes and that she wished she was as fit as Tammy. And then Pryor actually came back with something that kind of shocked a lot of us. And I was like, did you seriously say that, dude? Did you seriously just say that? He said something to the effect of, did Tammy have the kind of body that you would describe as extremely fit? He's insinuating that she didn't have maybe she was too overweight to be healthy or so. I don't know. Or did, I was mad. No, Pryor, don't do that. But on top of that, we had all of these people saying she was very fit, she was very healthy, she hadn't gained weight. What are you talking about? But here's the other thing. I wanted to just do a little plug. An outdoors wilderness adventure type company that makes outer clothing wear for plus-sized women, because there's just not enough out there. You go to most sportsman type stores and the clothing there is for like small, petite people. And I'm bringing this up. The company is called 37 Minutes. And that's a latitude or longitude that's significant to the founder. And the founder is my cousin. And she is fantastic. And as I speak, as I am recording this, she is climbing to Everest Base Camp for the second time. And by all the fancy medical charts, every one of them would call her morbidly obese. And yet, if there's any sort of physical activity or challenge, she would kick my trash. The best shape I've ever been in my life, she would totally still kick my trash. So just by looking at someone, you don't know how healthy or fit they are. And that's not even bringing up the fact that Pryor is far from looking like an extremely fit person. I'm not body shaming him. I just find it ironic that someone who looks like him would try to insinuate that someone who doesn't look thin, especially a woman, would be unhealthy and ready to die. That's just nuts. The last witness on that topic was the principal, Richard Gardner. And again, he said Tammy was very healthy. I saw her walking around the school all day long. She was in the lunchroom. She was active and helping people out. She was doing jobs that were beyond the scope of her required job description. She would be on the playground. She would walk students to and from from a classroom to the library and back again. And he personally witnessed her crossing the finish line of a 5K. And she didn't look like she was out of breath or miserable. And this was the month before she died. A month before she died, he witnessed her cross the finish line of a race. And she was fine. So Pryor's attempts at making Tammy look ill and frail are just, they're not working. They are not working, dude. Then we had Bruce Mattingly, who's a detective, take the stand. And he is the one who said that Emma, Chad and Tammy's daughter Emma, said that their mother had been slowing down. Now, Emma took those high fit classes with Tammy. She's very much on her dad's side. She's the one that we saw on the patrol camera recording that was shown earlier in trial. Well, she's defending him and she's claiming that her mother was slowing down. I think she would know she's lying because you have so many other people saying that no, right up to the day she died, that Tammy was healthy and in very great shape and was not sick at all. Principal also pointed out that as a principal, you are very aware of which teachers tend to get sick because getting a substitute for any employee is very difficult at the last minute. And so you're aware of which ones tend to need the substitutes. And he has no memory of Tammy ever needing a sub. She was always reliable and always very healthy. But Emma would not answer his questions. He tried to get Emma to explain more about what she was saying, and she just wouldn't answer. She would not talk to him. So my thought was, suspicious much? We are the next detective. If you watch Lori's trial, you know and probably respect this dude. It's Detective, I think it's former detective now, I'm not sure, Vince Kaaiakamanu, and he's fantastic. He has no patience for Pryor, let's put it that way, and he knows what happened. He knows what happened, and he's not gonna let things slide. They talk a bit about Tammy's email to her son Mark, who was on a mission at the time of her death. And they're going into the quote-unquote paintball gun incident, which we know was not a paintball gun. Everything points to it being Alex with an AR-15. And Detective Kaaiakamanu knows this. But Pryor is again trying to sow doubt, which is his job. He brings up the email that Tammy wrote to her missionary son Mark, and saying in this email she doesn't sound worried. She doesn't sound scared. And she did mention in the email that, well, after this thing happened, I didn't really want to go out the next night because she was afraid for her safety. She did say she was afraid. However, she did downplay the incident a bit in the email. And here's my thought on that. Duh, this is a mother writing an email to her son who was away for 2 years. She has very limited contact with him. What mother is going to make her son worry? Like you don't do that. Like I've had 3 of my 4 children serve missions. Oh, that's brutal. Let me just say that. Absolutely brutal. And just as our missionaries kept little things from me so I wouldn't worry about their safety, if there was something going on at home, I didn't want them to worry either. So you censor yourself a little bit because you don't want them to worry. That's what a mother does. That's what a parent does, right? So that email, that's not evidence that Tammy thought it was a paintball gun and was not scared. She was terrified. So here's one of my favorite moments of the trial, is where they replayed the 911 call related to the, again, quote unquote, paintball incident. And it was beautiful. All right, listen to this. This just brings me all kinds of joy. So we've got Detective Kaaiakamanu, the top right. See the little arrow there. The circle at the bottom is John Pryor, the defense counsel.
She said paintball a number of times during that 911 call, correct?
A couple times, yes.
And then at the end, she said, holding the gun like he was holding a rifle. She never said he was holding a rifle, did she?
I think you just stated it. He was holding a gun like the rifle.
She never said she was holding a rifle, did she?
Objection, Your Honor. The audio speaks for itself.
Sustained. Okay. There was no discussion about a specific rifle. Was it not the manner in which the gun was being held that was what we heard?
There's no specific rifle that she named, no.
Okay.
There was no specific rifle that she named.
Okay. Well, she didn't even say it was a rifle, did she?
She said a gun and a rifle.
Well, she said a gun holding like a rifle. Isn't that what she said?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, the audio speaks for itself.
Sustained.
Judge, I should be allowed to go into whether or not the manner in which.
Then replay that section, Mr. Pryor,
Okay.
if you want to make it clear, but to just keep
Okay.
asking on the audio we just listened to is improper.
Bailiff, could I have 232 again, please?
He didn't say anything, or he just kept like he was holding the gun like he was, had a rifle and just shooting at me. So, but nothing came out of the gun either, so I don't think it was loaded.
But we can agree then that the 911 call would speak for itself, right?
Correct. Having a rifle and shooting at her.
Yeah, mad respect for Detective Kaaiakamanu. That brings me joy. Yes, he has no patience for Pryor and his nonsense. Full disclosure on that one, I edited out some of Pryor's long pauses and cut down the 911 call to just the relevant part. We didn't need to hear the whole thing. They also went into discussing Google searches that were found on Tammy's device. I'm not sure if it was a phone or computer or tablet after the paintball, quote unquote, gun incident, and saying that she had searched for paintball guns and maybe she was trying to identify a style or a type. And Detective Kaaiakamanu didn't know anything about that. I believe it was Coulter Cannon who said something about that early in the trials, but that was not something he knew about. I wonder, this is my speculation, if perhaps those searches were done by Chad on her device, because that's happens. He can, hey, let me see your phone and let's look up and maybe here's probably what you were seeing. Throughout the whole discussion of that incident, Pryor seems to have two arguments, and I know he's trying to raise reasonable doubt, again, his job, but it seems odd that he's trying to come up with two plausible arguments when both just fall apart under the slightest examination. Number one, he's trying to make it sound like it wasn't a real gun and it wasn't an attempted shooting. That's probably his best argument because we don't have 100% certainty that it was Alex with an AR-15. The thing with this case is there's so much circumstantial stuff that any one or two or three things is not alarming necessarily all by itself, setting aside actually finding the remains of Tylee and JJ and that kind of thing. But things leading up to those events are not alarming necessarily in isolation. But you put the whole totality together, this was Alex with an AR-15. There's just too much that says that. Pryor's other argument that holds no water whatsoever is that Alex was targeting Chad. Explain that one to me. He keeps trying to imply that Chad is the one who drove the Dodge Dakota, not Tammy, more often. Despite the fact that we know that Tammy drove the Dodge Dakota. In fact, then on May 2nd, we'll get into Heather Daybell's testimony later, but when he's talking to her, he's like, well, but it's a pickup. As if women can't drive trucks or maybe even prefer them. I know two women that are rather close to me who like trucks, and one wants a Dodge truck. Like, give me a break. Like, anyway, so that was kind of funny. But aside from the fact that women can drive trucks and enjoy that, there's also the very real thing that if Chad and Lori are having an affair and they're planning to get married, why in the world would Lori send Alex to kill Chad? She killed Charles to be with him, like what, and her own children to be with him. So Pryor has not given any explanation, any possible motive or reason or anything to explain why Alex would be targeting Chad. It just makes no sense whatsoever. They were talking about how Alex had done searches about the drop of ammunition that would come out of a rifle, meaning as a bullet is traveling through the air, before it hits its target, it will drop because of gravity. So you have to calculate that in. And Alex was doing searches on the drop of this type of ammunition from this type of gun over I think like 100 feet or even 300 feet, these longer distances. And Pryor was then suggesting that he was making these searches because it's hunting season, but no hunter would use an AR-15 to take down a deer because that would destroy the deer. Like you don't do that. But okay, argument's sake, let's say that. It still doesn't explain why Alex also showed up at her house with an AR-15 and tried to shoot Tammy. So that, no. But here's my theory as to why he was Googling those longer distances. I think that he originally was going to try to take Tammy down at a distance and was wondering how far he could be in the cow pastures, across the street, whatever, and not be seen. And then maybe he realized, I'm not a good enough marksman to go that far back, and Lori and Chad will be mad if I miss, so I better go up close. And he's still screwed up, too really cold that weekend, too cold, and then the gun misfired. That's why I think he was searching for the longer distances. That's day 11, what I thought were the highlights. We'll go to day 12. The first witness we had was remarkable, I thought. It was Stephen Schultz. He is a funeral director and mortician, basically. He had worked with Chad, interacted with him many times over the years. Not only were they in the same neighborhood, in the same congregation, their same ward, but when Chad was sexton of a cemetery, and then Stephen Schultz, of course, as a funeral director, they would end up seeing each other at grave sites and funerals. Schultz said that he had a lot of respect for Chad. He thought that Chad was a great guy up to this point. His opinion has since changed. But Chad apparently called him that morning after Tammy had died and said, would you come and bring Tammy's body home to Utah? We're having the funeral there. And he said, I would be honored, absolutely. And he didn't want to make the drive by himself, being an older gentleman, I suppose, and it is a long drive. So he had Chad's brother-in-law, who also lived in Springville, drive with him. And so they drove all the way up, and they met with Chad, and he said that there were red flags right away that were just strange to him. Like, keep in mind, this is a man who has been working in the death industry, and to him there were red flags. Among them of the Chad was just very businesslike, planning the funeral. Like, it was not a big deal. He didn't seem at all distraught that his wife had just died. And granted, Chad probably is not squeamish around death because he did work as a sexton for so long, but this is his wife who supposedly died suddenly and shockingly, and he just seems totally cool with it. The other thing is that Chad kept referring to the funeral and the viewing and all of the death-related events that had to happen as hoopla he wanted to get through and just get it over with. And Schultz thought that was a little alarming. Like, it's not hoopla. This is honoring, in theory, the love of your life, your wife of almost 30 years. What? Then he talked about how Chad wanted the funeral to be on Monday. That's 2 days. Over a weekend. So he said 3 to 4 days he's seen it. That's very fast, but he's seen it. But that's also during when they're all weekdays. If someone dies, say, on a Monday, and 3 or 4 days later, then the funeral services happen. But we're talking, it was a weekend when she died, Saturday, and then we have Sunday. Most places aren't open. Newspapers are not going to get the obituary printed in time, and on and on. That's just the logistics. And not to mention the distance between Rexburg and Springville, Utah, where Chad was insistent that she be buried. Schultz did say, I don't think there's any way we can get this done so that the service can be on Monday. Among them, even the fact that you can't transport a body across state lines unless it's already embalmed. So that process had to happen. They picked up her body after it was embalmed, and they drove it back down. But before they did that, he said he kind of did a quick check of her body because he was so convinced that there was foul play. And he's not a medical doctor. He was not doing an autopsy, but he still kind of just looked over, and are there any obvious wounds, like a bullet or a knife or broken bones or any kind of obvious trauma? He didn't see anything, which makes sense because we know she died of asphyxia, but he looked for that because it seemed so strange. And on the drive back to Utah, at one point he says to his companion, who was Chad's brother-in-law, "Do you think Chad killed her?" And absolutely not. How can you say that? This is Chad we're talking about. And then the prosecutor said, knowing what you know now and everything that has happened since, do you happen to know if that brother-in-law's opinion has changed? And he just said yes. Yes, it has. A couple other weird things that Schultz brought up that were intriguing. One was that he was the one who dressed Tammy's body. The family didn't want to do it. And that is very strange, especially for Latter-day Saints, that being able to clothe the body is very sacred. And those who've had their endowment, having gone through the temple, they wear ceremonial clothing when they're buried. It's a very sacred thing to do and an honor. So it's strange that supposedly the family didn't want to do that. Granted, of the immediate family, that would have just been Emma, and maybe she couldn't bear it, but Chad didn't either. They wouldn't have had a son, most likely, if it's a woman, out of respect for her. But Tammy had family in the area too, and you can't tell me that, say, a sister or her own mother wouldn't have wanted to clothe her. That seems so strange to me. And then when he was clothing her, he looked her body over again because he was still thinking something is off here. Something is just wrong. Something that jumped out at me that Schultz didn't mention, but again, as a mother who has had missionaries out, this jumped out at me. And not only as a mother who has had missionaries, but also my parents presided over a mission when I was a kid. So I've seen policies change. I've seen how this stuff works from the back end. That's a 3-year commitment that you're called to. And it's an intense one. I watched my dad turn gray as mission president. It was intense. But that was in the 80s. In the 80s, the policies were far more strict than they are today, where if you went on a mission, you just knew that if a family member died, you would not be able to go home and then return to your mission. That you're making a sacrifice, you're going out, and you might as well be on Jupiter. Like you're in your own little world for 2 years on your mission, and you just knew you weren't coming back if someone were to die. That's different today. Time I was aware, a little more than 26 years ago, I had a friend whose father passed away, and her brother came home from his mission for the funeral and then went back. And I went, whoa, when did that policy change? That's awesome. But that was, I'm trying to remember exactly what year that was. It was when my second was still in a car seat. And she's 27, so somewhere in there. Anyway, so it's definitely changed over time. If Tammy had died in the 80s, so this whole thing had happened back then, it wouldn't have been an option for Mark to come home. It was an option nowadays, but the way Chad rushed through the process, there was no time for Mark to come home. And to me, that is one more level of cruelty on Chad's part. Mark could have come home if Chad had given him that opportunity. But no, it was more important to him to get through the hoopla and get Tammy in the ground so he could marry Lori. And that pisses me off. So, and no one has brought up even how Mark was notified. Usually it would be someone from the family would contact, say, your bishop or stake president, and they would then call the mission president and let them know. And then the mission president would personally tell the missionary, by the way, I need to let you know that your mother has passed, and then figure out what they wanted to do from there. I would not put it past Chad to have just sent an email. Especially since it's very common that missionaries, what they call them preparation days, are Mondays and Tuesdays, usually Mondays. Sometimes it can shift around, but it's very common for Monday to be your preparation day. And that's when you do your laundry and you write your emails and all that kind of stuff. I almost wonder if Chad just waited until Monday and sent Mark an email. By the way, Mom's dead. Funeral's tomorrow. Sucks to be on a mission, huh? I mean, anyway, that makes me mad that he could have potentially been there. We had another one of my favorite witnesses. So we had Ron Arnold, who he is a real estate agent, and he knew Chad from the Rexburg area. They were in this, I believe they were in the same congregation again. And this was the guy who Chad was like, you have to show this plot to my friends. And this is where David Warwick was supposedly thinking about doing a development in that area. But even David didn't really want to see it that day because it was a Sunday, and let's not do work on Sundays. And at that point, he also told Ron Arnold that he was going to go to Hawaii for a while to help a friend write a book. Only the first part of that statement was true. He's going to Hawaii for a while. The rest of it was complete fake lies. In November, after they married, and that was the first real conversation they had, and Lori was the more talkative of the two, which tracks based on what we have seen of them. Lori said she had 7 children. And when I heard that, I thought, what? The math isn't mathing. Because if I figure, okay, so the children, the Lori can claim, like she birthed 2, Colby and Tylee. She adopted JJ, that's 3. Like, okay, so she's counting her stepsons with Charles, that's 2 more, so we're up to 5. But then Chad has 5. So are we at 10? Like, I couldn't come up with a way to get to 7. I could maybe 8. I could not come up with any way to get, if you get, her 3 and then Chad's 5, that's 8, not 7. So what is up with that? And then Arnold's wife also brought up, she confirmed that Lori said they had 7 children, which I didn't understand. So, but apparently there is an email out there. Oh, the weird things that Chad believed. They believed in their past lives. That they had lived however many times before. And when they were James and Elena, James being one of the apostles with Jesus Christ and living in that era, that they had 7 children then. Okay. And here are their names. Ready? Kenneth, who's known as Simon, which I'm sure he got from the New Testament because Peter known as Simon. Melanie, as in Melanie Boudreau Pulowski, Lori's niece, who she views as a daughter. Jada, whoever that is. Jace, that's such a biblical name. But apparently Jace was a quarterback because they had American football in Jesus' time. And of course their son's the quarterback and not just like a second string offensive lineman or something. Has to be a quarterback. Of course it does. Someone named Jenny, which I guess that's the most generic Gen X name, whatever. Okay. But this Jenny is one of the Dream Girls. And I thought that's a movie fiction. Did you mean the Supremes? Like, I'm not sure what he's talking about. Then a boy named Connor, and then JJ. So the 2 people that we know that are real are Melanie and JJ. Notice that Colby and Tylee are not on that list of her 7 children. But they assumed, the Arnolds did, that the children had all grown up. They're up to empty nesters, but not for the reason one would normally think. So then Arnold goes into the fact that Chad wanted to build another house on his own lot. With the county codes as they were, that he would not be able to split the lot and sell off a chunk later, but you would be able to build that structure on it. You couldn't split it and sell it, but you could build something else on it. And Chad wanted to build a modular home because that's faster than doing one from scratch. Now, here's another misunderstanding. I have heard some people say that a modular home is a mobile home. Not the same thing. No, it was not a mobile home. Modular home. That modular home is when chunks are like pre-made, and then you basically stick all those pieces together. Like, think Legos. You're putting together pieces that were fabricated elsewhere, brought there, and then you combine them. So it is a whole lot faster. The reason Chad gave for wanting to build this modular home was so that he and Lori would have some place to live. And of course their sons, the quarterback and not just like a second string offensive lineman or something. Has to be a quarterback. Of course it does. Someone named Jenny, which I Don't know why he couldn't live in the house that was already there, but that was the reason he gave to Mr. Arnold. So a couple of funny things with that. First off, when they were discussing the size of the yard and that. So
Okay, so the acreage that you're talking about, do you have any recollection of how much acreage we're talking around that surrounds Chad's house?
You own it. How many acres is it?
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know. Judge, could we have a sidebar?
I laughed so hard. I cannot express the joy that answer brought me. Because those of us in the know, we know that Chad can't pay him anymore. He's run out of money, and so John Pryor has a lien on his house and basically owns it now. Didn't want the jury to know that. Why he brought up the acreage is beyond me. It didn't seem to serve a purpose, but Mr. Arnold would have none of this nonsense. We had an absolutely beautiful moment here where there was a sidebar that was outside of the jury's presence that, oh goodness, I thought, wow, the prosecution is being super classy here. And I almost wondered, why are you showing your hand to Pryor? But I think they did what I'm about to explain because it would help to ensure that there is no way Chad's getting off through any loophole of that they didn't know X, Y, or Z, or they didn't have enough time to prepare about whatever. The prosecution says there was probably a different motivation for trying to dig up part of the yard and put in a concrete foundation and then build something else on that backyard. To dispose of or hide the bodies underneath the new house, remove them. It was to conceal the bodies of Tylee and JJ. The prosecutor, Ms. Beatty, specifically said, if Pryor opens the door to discussing the modular home, that is opening the door for us to ask Mr. Arnold about motivations for building that modular home, just so you're aware. And Pryor says, oh, I'm not going to do that. And then he even said, well, I didn't bring up this. He was trying to say he didn't open the door to that question. And she said, you did. And here's the question I'm going to ask. She read it out loud, the exact question. And Boyce basically said, yeah, if that's your exact questions, that's permittable in redirect after cross. And Pryor was like, no, I didn't open that door. But she'd already warned him, this is before the day even started, she had warned him, this is what we're going to do. So she then had a hearing to make sure that it would be an admissible question. It's now in the record that she said, this is what I'm going to ask. It's in the record. The Boyce said, yes, it is acceptable. And Pryor still opened the door and she walked through it. It was wonderful. So she did ask Mr. Arnold, knowing what we know now about what was found on that property, has your opinion changed to what Chad's motivation was for wanting to build that modular home? And he said, yes. She couldn't go deeper than that because that wouldn't have been appropriate on redirect, and Boyce would have stopped it and Pryor would have objected. But that one question got through, and I'm sure the jurors were like, ding, they know. Finished up that day. Craig Huff, who was a friend of Chad's from their Springville days, they were very close. And at one point, Chad tells him after Tammy dies that just shortly before Tammy died, he had just gotten hold of all of the bank account passwords. What a miracle that he got hold of them right before Tammy died. And I'm wondering, how did he get hold of them? Did he tell Tammy, give them to me? I'm wondering why he didn't have them before. Pryor said something on the lines of, oh, well, so that Tammy held the purse book. I'm like, you mean the purse strings or the accounting books? He's always saying weird things, but essentially she was the one in charge of the money or controlling it. I think the reality was she was the only responsible one. She was the only one ever bringing in a decent salary and benefits. And he was off going on trips and pretending to sell enough books, which he wasn't, and being a jerk. So of course she had to make sure the finances were in order. I don't think there's anything nefarious about that. I think it's nefarious that he suddenly had an interest and got the passwords right before she died. Oh, what a miracle. No. If you have any questions about the Latter-day Saint elements of the case, please let me know. And yeah, shout out again to Katie. Thank you for the book. I'm looking forward to reading it. As you said in your note, I probably will not enjoy it, but it will be insightful, and I will report back on that again for sure. So in the meantime, as I always say, in the middle of all this bitterness, go get yourself something sweet.